So I'm just going to give you a quick CV on Vandana. She sent me a very long one. I, I was really tired reading it. I felt like a little homeopathic pill when I saw that and what she has achieved. So I'm afraid I've condensed it all, Vandana. Due apologies to you. So Vandana is, I'm sorry guys, for all of you who are there, she's married. So, and she's got a kid, so don't even think about it, right? Okay, so Bandhana's got a PhD in biology and an MS in ecology, followed by diploma and postgrad diploma in environmental law. She is a specimen as unique as her study subject. She has extensively conducted awareness campaigns, training programs, and seminars for undergrad, grad, and MSc students, as well as the Forestry Department officials and indigenous tribes in the Nicobar Islands on flying foxes. Starting with research projects, assisting actively in post-tsunami relief work in Nicobar Islands, pioneering the work on bats by determining the status, distribution, and ecology of 32 species of bats in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, to project design and preliminary field work on the menace of wild birds in the International Airport, New Delhi. Bandhana is living proof that every day consists of more than 24 hours. With tremendous support and encouragement with our husband and son. We want them on the screen. Call them on the screen. Hi, Gaurav. Hi, Gaurav. Where's Arnav?
Arnav.
Disappeared at the right moment.
I know. Like father, like son.
Yes.
He's coming in. Jaldi aao.
Here we go. Hi, Arnav. How are you?
Say hi.
Hi, Gaurav. Where are you hiding now? He's really screen shy, isn't he?
All three are.
Hi, Gaurav. Okay, so with tremendous support and encouragement from her husband and son, she is a potent force of nature packed in a tiny body. A winner of numerous grants and awards, she is the embodiment of dedication, pouring her heart and soul into conservation, and a true role model to all of us. I am now handing it over to Vandana. Vandana, please come on the screen first, and then you can share your screen.
Thank you, Venkat. It's a very small 4-letter word, bats, but there's a lot that I've had to learn in it. And I've worked mostly in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and we'll give you a glimpse of my project and about the place, about the diversity in bats, and let's see how interested and how fond of you become of these handsome creatures. So we know a little less about the bats because maybe they're nocturnal and they're very, very misunderstood. They are not creepy, they are not blind, they are not blood-sucking. We don't have vampire bats. If a bat bites you, you do not become a Dracula. That doesn't happen at all. They don't fly into your heads. So they don't fly into your eyes. They don't fly into your hair. They don't get stuck to you. These are myths. And bats will not be blind. Blind as a bat is only a statement. They have extremely good vision. They can fly as close till their nose tip and go back without touching it. And that is the only way that a rodent can fly. Because we keep calling it flee the mice, I think, in Russia. In French, I think it's called flees the mice. That is the mouse with wings. Well, it's not a rodent. It is a mammal. Absolutely a mammal, gives birth to young ones called pups and is a very protective mother. They're extremely, like I said, extremely handsome. Well, beautiful ears, very, very charismatic nose leaves, and these are what are responsible for its using eye location, as well as your the way they hear. And I think a lot of sonars and everything, they even the research and all is happening on it to find out how do they know what insect, what distance, and what is it going to catch. They're that specific. And this particular thing is called echolocation. It's mostly in the insect eating bats. Anything less than 25 grams is an insect eating bat. Anything more than 25 grams is a fruit-eating species, which is a fruit bat. So they're basically broadly two types, just a fruit bat and an insect bat. So they're mammals, extremely gifted with the true ability of flight. They don't have hollow bones like birds. They have actually their fingers, if you see their hand has been spread out, the thumb is free, and they have web between the fingers, and that is what makes their flight and their wing. They live in huge colonies in big groups, which are called roosts, and they like to stay in slightly dark places like caves and all, primarily because it's cooler. They cannot tolerate extremes of weather, very hot, and they'll die. They give birth once a year, and they don't pair. They do not pair for life. That happens in some birds, but not in bats. But as far as the fruit bats, well, they're very effective seed dispersers, and that can be very critical in tropical forests. So how do bats fly? Their true ability to fly, they are very, very gifted, and they're the only mammals. Now, if you see the wingspan, what you see is the thumb is what is your, the first finger is your thumb, which is the only thing that is free. And the bones that is the second finger, third finger, fourth finger, you can figure out. And then there's a web between the legs and the fingers, and that is what forms its wing. So that is how it gets the wing membrane. A wing membrane, if it's punctured, can regenerate. So generally, if somebody's doing, kind of genetic studies and all, they just take a wing punch, so you don't have to kill the species. So there are about 1,000 species, 1,000 different kinds of bats worldwide, and there are 119 in India. And the smallest one, well, that's the bamboo bat, as big as your thumb, which would be about 5 inches max. The biggest bat is, well, the flying fox, the pteropus, which you see mostly in the urban areas also. Well, we have the largest one, Pteropus giganteus in India, but the larger one, the largest in the world is Pteropus vampyrus, which is larger than the one that you see around you nowadays. Also, I mean, if you see fruit-eating species like figs and all are fruiting right now, so you'll have them flying to you. So that's a broad classification of bats. We're not going to get into a class right now. Megachiroptera is basically the big bats. Microchiroptera are the small bats. And basically that's how all the species have been grouped. So it's more of insect-eating bats than the fruit-eating species. Just to give you a gist of the fruit-eating species, the pteropus, which are the old world fruit bats, and that's one of them with their pups. And it's a the fruit bats carry the baby with them. While as the insect-eating bats, they leave the baby within the roost, that is the caves, primarily because it gets too heavy to fly around and catch something like an insect which is faster for an insect-eating bat. So only the fruit bats will carry the baby with them throughout till the baby is independent enough to be on its own. That's the Pteropus giganteus, the largest in India, and the second largest in the world. Probably Pteropus vampyrus, what I was telling you about, was the largest. It's slightly bigger than this one. And these two species are the only two cave-dwelling insect-eating bats. Sorry, cave-dwelling fruit-eating bats. And well, if you see the tongue, it's extremely long. So what it does, it's a nectar feeding. So when there are, these flowers that fruit that open out in the night, and they're extremely full of sweet nectar, they just lap up the nectar. So that's why the tongue is that shape. And these are absolutely cave dwelling. And what happens with this is that the Eonectris and Rusitis, they have probably very primitive echolocation, because echolocation helps them find the roost back. So these are the only fruit-eating cave-dwelling species. And then you have the insect-eating bats. And this one is Rhinopoma, which are the free-tailed bats. If you see the tail actually in the first picture on your left, you can see the tail. So the tail sometimes is enclosed within the membrane that is between the legs, and sometimes free. This one is in the free tail one. This is an extremely common species and found mostly in bunkers and abandoned buildings and old monuments and things like that. The sheath-tailed bats. Now, if you see now for the tail for the sheath-tailed bats, the tail is semi-enclosed within the membrane. So it only juts out when you pull the membrane. Otherwise, it's absolutely enclosed within the membrane. That's why the sheath-tailed bats. These are the tombed bats also, not because they stay in tombs and they are scary and all that, but they just call the tomb bats, and they kind of can get into very, very narrow spaces and crevices also. So it's extremely fun to see them just crawl in like a spider, they actually crawl in like a crab. So they go actually diagonal into their crevices. Then you have the free-tailed bats. And the one on your left below is Automops rotoni, which is a very rare species, and it is found only in Belgaum, only from one cave. There have been reports that now Meghalaya, somebody said that it's probably also there, but it needs to be validated still. This is an extremely sweet bat. There's just some 70 species, and it's the only Schedule 1 species. Only 2 bats in India are listed in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Act. One is the Latidin Salim Ali, which is the Salim Ali's fruit bat, and this Automops rotani. This is an extremely good looking bat, and that's how it stays. We don't have any more pictures on it because they are extremely, extremely vigilant about this particular area, and they don't let you enter and see or touch the bats or hold them or anything. So whatever you can get is this. And then you have some more insect eating bats. This is the false vampire bats, the Megaderma. If you see the ears, now these are 2 species, and they're just differentiated based on the structure of the nose leaf on them. One has a typical heart shape and the other one is a normal leaf nose. These are kind of carnivorous bats. So that is why they call the false vampires. But we do not have any blood-sucking species within India. This is an extremely woolly bat. They love to fly alone. They love to stay in just 5 to 6 in number. And it could be in a tree hollow or caves. And they, I think, abandon the roost and sometimes they come back also. They're extremely huge eyes for insect-eating bats because insect-eating bats generally have small eyes. But this is one of my favorites. Then you have the horseshoe bats. Now, if you see the leaf nose pattern on the nose, it is the shape of a horseshoe. And that is why these are called the horseshoe bats. And well, there are some 5, I think some 6 or 7 species within India as well. And it's not like a bat is only black and gray and, those dull colors. This one is a beautiful rufous orange. And primarily it could be because they stay in huge groups, and because of the guano and the, air that comes up and the, it's probably getting bleached out or it's getting bleached out into this color. It's one of the thought processes, but it's not been validated ever now. These are some of the leaf nose bats. Now, if you see the nose leaf, it's not the shape of a horseshoe. That is why earlier the horseshoe and the leaf nose used to be in one family. But then over time, it's been divided into because this species was also quite common and quite abundant. So just to kind of give it a different characteristic and also clearly identify it, it was given a different family. And if you see on the extreme left, again, you have below, you have a white bat. That's an albino. Albinos are also found. But bats generally will not be lighter colors because they'll be easy to detect them at night by their predators. That is why mostly they are in darker colors. Albino, we found just one within the whole roost. And if you see the albino, it's got red eyes. So that's the form of a true albino. And it's it is there, it's rare, but we were lucky to find it in one of the caves. This is an endemic species within the Nicobars itself. Some of the even smaller bats, a little bigger than the bamboo bats, and the smallest, that is your thumb, but extremely nice ones. And all these insect eating bats, you must be actually thinking that they all have to eat insects, then they must be coming at the same time. No, they actually divide their times. So even whether it's fruits or it's insects, they'll come at a different time when they're eating a specific thing. So they are never kind of, eating on somebody else's tiffins. They are very specific. Extreme left on top is the bamboo bat. Very rare to get it. And if you see, it's absolutely flattened face. So it's able to actually get inside the bamboo nodes. It kind of cuts through the node and gets inside the bamboo and stays there. And there could be as many as maybe 10 or 15 of them staying within that. So if you tap on the bamboo, you can hear them flutter inside. So you know that it's there. But I've not been able to find it within the bamboo, but we've got them in mist nets. Then you have the Pipistrellus, which is another very, very common species. And they're also called the early evening bats. What you see, very small bats flying near your electric poles and lights in the night, is probably this one. Because this is an early evening bat, comes at 5 to 6 in the evening and then goes back to the roost and then doesn't come out. So then you will have the other insect eating bats coming. So that's how they divide their time and the resource that they have to feed on. They're very, very good looking and very painted bat, Carivola picta. Nobody's painted this species, but it is absolutely highlighted with the nice orange on its wing. It's a very, very good looking bats. Then you have, they're very, very different species within the insect eating bats, and they're very, very charismatic and all. Then you have genus Miniopterus. Well, it's called the helmet bat also, because it actually looks like somebody's worn a woolly, helmet or a kind of a wig. So that's why it's called the helmet bat as well. And these are some of the other species as well. And some forage together, some forage singly. Most of the insect eating bats that we've come across forage singly, except the Pipistrellus. But they'll also have, like maybe a half a kilometer is mine and then the other half is somebody else's. So they don't kind of sit down and eat on somebody else's area. So they're very, very, very particular, very organized. And I think there's a lot of things to learn from them. So bat homes, we all want a home. They also want a home. And they live in trees, like the fruit bats. They live in caves, like most of the insect eating bats and some of the fruit eating species. Abandoned buildings, if you don't disturb them, then they definitely stay there. Underside of bridges as well, because it's cooler. And probably you won't get so many predators coming in and disturbing them, and people won't be walking and trying to scare them off and see, urta hai ki nahi urta hai. So that also happens. This is some of the fruit bats, the pteropus that you see in urban areas. You'll see them hanging like this. So, and the below one is Cynopterus, which likes to roost in about 5 to 6, like a harem. There'll be one male and there'll be 5, 6 females. So you can sit and actually feel lucky chap. But some of the bats roost like that. They don't mate for life. These are some of the caves, the abandoned buildings, like what we've seen in Kanheri and in Elephanta and Kanheri in Mumbai. Some of the natural habitats like caves. This is in the Nicobar group of islands. And this is how they roost and huddle together for warmth. So when they leave all the babies together hanging at a point. They come back, the baby is where it's been left, and the mother comes back to the baby. They are that very, very specific about their baby. Bunkers, road culverts, well, they definitely use it. And I don't think they liked us disturbing them there, but well, we had to take some photographs and some shots of it. Bats have good eating habits, not bad. They have huge appetites. Most bats have to eat almost 3 times their weight. Then they use echolocation, what we were discussing, mostly by the insect-eating bats which live in the caves and all that, to find the insects that they have to feed on and their roosts where they have to live. And some of their favorite foods are beetles, moths, flies, mosquitoes. A particular bat, one bat can eat almost 60,000 mosquitoes in a single night. Fish also, frogs also, is what the vampire bats, the false vampires, what we have the Megaderma, would be eating. Fruit bats are very, very good for our ecosystems because they can be very effective pollinators. A fruit bat can fly as much as 25 kilometers in a single night just for foraging, that is for eating. So you can imagine the kind of dispersal of a particular seed. At least 25 kilometers is minimum. And most of the fruit eating bats will go on to fruits that will firstly be very, very sweet smelling, and flowers which firstly open at the night, produce a lot of pollen, and will be very fragrant and extremely light in color to attract them. Cauliflower, figs. But if I have mango and fig, the fruit bat will definitely go in for the mango, not for the fig. So it goes in for the seasonal fruits and not for something that it can get year round. So they are very specific and very smart as well. Let me give you an insight about the Pteropus faunulus. It's endemic to the Nicobars. It's not found anywhere else in the world. We rediscovered it after 100 years. And unfortunately, it was locally extinct from the island that it was originally described from. And today, it's only on 6 islands in the Nicobars, that is the Central Nicobar group. It is the only solitary roosting fruit bat, which is the only one in India. Mostly fruit bats roost in huge colonies, but this one roosts singly. And we never found even a pair together. Just to give you an highlight about the islands, are very linear and long, and they are home to a lot of people who are indigenous, as well as the area is extremely important because it's very understudied and it's a researcher's paradise. You have such beautiful things and such unique things that it's sometimes you feel that there is something missing in the islands, but there's a lot of work still remaining to be done. It's just an islet, just a kind of an insight into what kind of species. You have the Andaman day gecko, and you have some of the butterflies, the giant wood spiders, the hammerhead, the Andaman teal, then the mangroves, which unfortunately after the tsunami were kind of disturbed quite a bit because that's what took the brunt in the tsunami. My project results, we found 22 species of bats within the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And that's just a broad classification of how many Megachiroptera, that is the big bats, and the Microchiroptera, which are the small bats. This is a list of the species that we found within the area. So we have 3 new records for the islands. We have 4 endemic species that we discovered, and probably 1 species which is new to science, which is one of the Pipistrellus mimic. It's looking like the Pipistrellus, but it isn't. And then the albino, which was the first time record that we found and photographed within India. On the right hand side is the normal color form that you find normally. So bats, well, they come out in the night. Are they really threatened? They definitely are. Fruit bats for food, some for medicinal use also. Asthma ठीक हो जाता है, for asthma control, for some aphrodisiac. I have not met anybody who said their asthma was cured after eating bat meat. And then gaps in wildlife, not maybe gaps in the Wildlife Protection Act, because there is no link between the conservation action that's being taken and the monitoring that happens, as well as the implementation. There's a lot of gap within that. And once that's covered, probably we'll be able to do conservation in a very strong note. Indirect is if we kind of enter into the caves or abandoned buildings and disturb them and say, okay, now fly and show me, which happens. Or they say, oh, you know, I've met a lot of people who said, oh, you know, I took a bat and I hit the bat with it because it tried to fly. That's really mean. Next time, don't do that. And please don't tell your kids also to do that. And there are a lot of myths and beliefs. If the bat circles the house, circles your room, if it comes inside, it gets bad luck. It doesn't happen. It's only circling because poor fellow, he's actually lost. He never wanted to be in the room, but he just got stuck. So what you have to do is shut off your fans, open the windows, close your lights and let it go. Some of the natural predators were snakes, water monitors, owls, and people. They hunt it. They think it's extremely in Northeast. I think eating bat, the fruit bats don't take in the fruit pulp. They just take in the juice and they spit out the pulp. So it's a delicacy in Northeast to take the intestines of the bat because it's very sweet. There's a trend in the Nicobars. There's a percentage increase per decade in the Nicobars of taking a toll on the resources because the population is on a rise. And after tsunami, well, it's even further because there's now a lot of consolidated clearing that happened for their settlements and everything, you know, because new places had to be made on higher ground so that water doesn't touch them. And copra, that's coconut, is one thing that is a huge loss to the natural vegetation there because people just converted into a huge coconut. This extreme left photograph is of Chora Island. It is just a 2-kilometer radius island and it's only full of coconut trees. There's hardly any natural vegetation left there today. This is what the tropical forest looks like. And that is what we are doing to it to build something where we want to live. So it's like a link. The people, if they're left on their own, is not an issue. But if we go there and say, now we will plant and we will clear and put plantations for you, is what is creating a bit of a problem. Without even thinking what is required in the area, we are trying to just convert the tropical evergreen forests into a dry mass. We will not have Andaman and Nicobars left for very long if we do this. Legal protection is good. I'm not saying the Wildlife Act is bad. The Wildlife Act is well written, but poorly understood and not implemented. Because most of the people who implement it don't go into the field to check out whether it is actually happening the way it should be happening or not. So that is one thing that needs to be done. Now, if I say the Nicobar flying fox is endemic, it is already extinct and all, they'll put it in Schedule 1. The only people who will not be able to do any work on it will be researchers and scientists like us. Because it gets extremely difficult to get kind of permissions. Because we are not the poachers. The poachers are still doing their job. We need to help them. I wouldn't say the poachers, it's probably the people who don't realize how important the species can be to a particular place. So we need to actually, all of us need to just hold hands and work together if we want conservation to be a success in India. Schedule 1, the green sea turtle, Schedule 1. It's just hunted. Nobody, who's checking? See? Crocodiles. and it's just for meat, and it is just for normal. Okay, today we got a crocodile's meat. They're not kind of dependent on these things for their protein supplement. They're basically a fish eating community. So if they are just told that this is not correct and not done, they will listen. But there has to be somebody explaining this to them without imposing it on them. Dugong, it is cheaper than buying chicken or even eggs in the islands. And then if that wasn't enough, let's plant coleus and let's plant exotics and kill the natural vegetation. I'm not going to say much about it because I think all of you know. A pet is a pet and a stray is a stray, and you have to leave it. I mean, what is supposed to be in a place, you have to let it be in its place. You cannot dislodge it. And by planting exotics, you're dislodging it. Air guns are very, very common. So they'll quickly actually get into it. And let's hunt for fun. We had a team from Doordarshan who came in to shoot what bat work we were doing. So it was extremely sweet that they came and did this. And other animals, well, see, that's a natural way they're keeping the birds. It's just a kind of a coconut shell that is tied it around its leg. And it's left, and the wings are clipped sometimes, and they can't fly. The bats also are kept as pets, and the wing is broken. And once it's broken, it can never be repaired. Turtles, they had no idea why they had caught it, but they just caught it. Fruit bats are also suffering the same fate in the islands because people are not aware, they're not synthesized. They need to be explained why not to do it. They are the closest to nature. So we cannot punish them, we have to explain it. We did a lot of education work within the islands. We tried to tell them what work we were doing, how we are doing it, and what are we achieving out of it. So we used to always give presentations within the area just for people to know what we are doing and how we're doing and what can we learn from it. So it's just an introductory thing, and it is just to involve the locals as well. We radio collared some 11 individuals, and we were able to find the day roost of the Nicobar flying fox. Only that's how, because otherwise it's solitary roosting and it's extremely shy and quiet. It does not call back if you call to it. This is just a glimpse of the radio collar that we used for it, and we have to use it. It has to be less than 3% of its body weight, and only then it's allowed. This will give you the island is linear. This Kamorta, we thought that the radio collared bat might leave the island, but it never did. And generally, we found the males to be traveling much shorter than the females. And well, they came from the roost to the foraging area and back. They never left the island. So we didn't have to bother about running to another island to find where the radio collared bat went. So how do we involve the people? How successful a conservation project? What about the time after research? We cannot stay there for donkey's years, and we cannot know enough of the species. Right now, I might know something about the species, but I would say that I'm only scratching the surface. There's still a lot to be done, and a lot of consolidated effort needs to come in when we need to work with the local people, local communities, as well as the people who are staying within the islands, not going from mainland to work in the islands. And involvement makes it fun because they feel very involved, they feel very important, and they feel extremely nice about it. That's basically about our conservation, where we've involved the local communities and they had fun using our equipment and they had fun tracking our bat also. So basically we've integrated the local communities as well as the officials, and we made a network of people within the islands. So if we give them a call, they tell us, oh, your bat is safe. We are not hunting it. So I feel it's a success measure. And then a sense of pride and ownership is also coming to people, that, you know, when they were interviewed by the Doordarshan people, they said, "Ye particular species is not available anywhere in the world. It's so special. It's only in our islands." So they feel very good about it. There's a lot of work on bats. We are a very few of us, and I hope there are going to be a lot more of you who will get interested in it, and please do join in whatever way that all of you can do into conservation. I think it's a big effort, and we can do it in our country. This is just to thank my team. Without them, they're all from the islands. Without them, I don't think my project would have been as successful as we feel it's been. A special thanks to my funding organizations, as well as the people, as well as Coastal Impact, Habitat Trust, Bombay Natural History Society, where they've all recognized our work and given us all the support as well as the help. So thank you so much.
Wow, that was lovely, Vandana. Never knew there was so much to bats. I was driving around one day in Goa and a bat actually flew into my car. And you know, this was quite close to my house in Donapala and in like an open field area, and really freaked us out because we had to get down and open the back door of the car so that it could fly out again, because it was still flying around in that confined area. I think it was disorientated.
Gaurav?
Yeah. So that was my only interaction with bats in Goa. Yeah. But it's very interesting to know what is really disturbing is what you've been telling us about all the,
Schedule 1 species.
not only that, the sad part about about habitat destruction and about exotic species being introduced. I didn't think it had gone as far as that in the Andamans, which is really, really disturbing. What about Nicobar? Do you think they're more isolated in their
No.
shade better than Andamans?
A little more isolated, as in you don't have the tourism there.
That's right, yeah.
But then there is no check, because, you know, some tourists might be, you know, intelligent enough to tell them, don't plant this, don't plant that. But what pictures I showed you were from the Nicobars.
Oh my
So
God.
Andamans is actually a shade worse than that, because Andamans is already into.
I know, Andamans is definitely worse, yeah.
Yeah, so this is in the Nicobars, and after tsunami,
Hmm.
they wanted to plant mangroves. So we actually requested them, that we told them, oh, it started regenerating, you know, because it has to come on its own.
Yeah, yeah.
So fortunately we were there, so we were able to stop that at least. Otherwise you would have had lines of mangrove trees.
Good Lord. It reminded me of Malaysia in some ways, because in Malaysia, that's what they've done. They've clear cut all the forests and they've planted palm trees for palm oil. And that's all you see. Monoculture everywhere, natural biodiversity is completely gone. It's really, really sad.
True.
All right, let's come on to the questions. So, Rutika is asking, scientists are trying to kill mosquitoes by gene drive. If such thing happens on large scale and mosquitoes become extinct, then how will it affect the bats?
It will not affect the bats, but I don't think there's something called extinction that will happen so fast, firstly. And secondly, you know, bats will adapt. They'll start eating something else, which might actually be more derogatory for us. That maybe we need that insect for a particular pollination or a particular other thing, but because you killed out what it eats, it's going to start eating something else. So whenever you kill one species, it's going to lead to a cascade of extinctions, and it will ultimately come to us as well.
Terrible. Yes. Okay. Siddharth Raju asks, what is the role of bats in their ecology and food chain? What could be possible reason for the local extinction for the flying fox on Carr Island? What's the evolutionary background of bats? Why is it the only mammal in air, for example, if you have multiple marine mammals?
Okay, adaptation. Firstly, see, why is it nocturnal? if the fruit bats are coming out in the night and eating the fruits and the birds are also eating it, there's going to be a lot of competition. So probably it's to avoid it as well. And secondly, it's the heat. That is one of the reasons why it's nocturnal. And what happens with the bats probably is that, it's going to be very specific to a certain species, like certain plants and all, which are blooming only in the night, which birds are actually not going to be eating. So then it's taking over the role of pollination for those particular species which are only active in the night, or only a particular fruit bat is going to be able to take nectar or pollen from that particular species only. So they're very specific. Like I told you about insect eating bats also, they're very, very specific about what they eat. It's not like, oh, today let me try a beetle and not a mosquito. It doesn't happen like that. They come at times that that particular insect is active. The other one will come at a time when the other insect is active. And they do not feed on each other's tiffin, like I told you. There is no sharing that's happening. They very clearly demarcate their roles, and they clearly demarcate their feeding habits.
Okay. And what's the possible reasons for the local extinction of the flying bat, flying fox on Carr Island?
See, in Karnik, it was reported in 1912. After that, there was no work on it. And Car Nicobar, if you now go, there is no natural vegetation. It's only coconut plantation. Only coconut plantation. So probably it's because the natural habitat is gone. So, and since we radio collared and the bat never left the island, it is a presumption, or we're probably thinking that it's probably not moving to another island to relocate. It just dies out. So it's probably happened that the natural habitat was so badly devastated in that island that it got killed because of that.
Very sad. And what's the evolutionary background of bats? Why is it that it's the only mammal in the air? For example, while you have multiple species of marine mammals.
I wouldn't be very clear on this one because it's just a particular niche that it's kind of occupied. So it's probably a kind of adaptation that it's taken for being able to fly and go to a particular place and eat.
Okay.
And
sorry.
it's a niche, I think. It's a very niche thing that it's taken probably. That particular niche within our ecosystem was completely empty, that this particular species has to be taken to this much of distance and taken. But how come we are not able to, we can't carry the seed and go and deposit, and it has to be, the pulp has to be taken and it has to be spit out, only then the seed will germinate. So it's possibly that that's how adaptation has come out, because the plants evolved and then a species had to be evolving to actually bring it out.
Okay, Ananya has a question. Would you please expand on communication among bats? What are the various reasons they communicate, and how are these modes different? Is there interspecies communication?
Interspecies communication does happen now. I don't know if you've heard of the sonar and the radio waves that we are catching up certain frequency when we put on the FM. It's only on a particular frequency. Each species, when we talk of a pipistrellus and then we talk of a horseshoe bat, will have different wavelengths. They don't overlap. So between the species, as in the same, if you're talking of horseshoe bats, they'll communicate with each other. Probably they know that that particular species is going to be there. It will avoid. And it's something called echolocation. Now, if you're in suppose you're in a empty room, you call out, you hear your voice back. That is because it is hitting something and coming back to you. That is called echolocation. This is what the insect-eating bats are using. So they echolocate, and it's so specific that when a bat echolocates, it's able to send down the frequency and find out what is the distance of its prey, what is the size, and what is the texture. It's that specific. And a lot of, I think, the flying guys and even within the Navy, they're using the radar systems as sonars and all to figure out how to communicate and get a specific record. It's very, very sophisticated and it's still being researched quite a bit. And there's something called bat detectors we use, which have different frequencies of bats we can find out from calls. So they have specific location, specific frequencies that each species uses. Does that answer my question?
I think you answered everything. Yes. Is there any interspecies communication that you're aware of?
Interspecies, no, generally it doesn't happen. They just kind of, what I've seen in the fruit bats, we had, 3 sympatric species, that is 3 species of fruit bats at the same time. There was no fighting, there was no communication that we saw between them, but they just avoided each other by using different times to come and eat and different heights. The smallest one ate at the lowest, then the medium ones ate slightly higher, and the biggest ate on the canopies. So I think they just use a space between them to demarcate between each other.
So if I can just expand on this question a little bit, have you knowledge of any species of bats where possibly 2 different species communicate on the same wavelength?
No,
Not at all.
no. It's very specific for each one. There is just no overlap.
Right. Okay, Nayantara is asking, if the communities in Nicobar were not primarily dependent on consumption of some of the exotic animals that you mentioned, what are the socio-economic or other drivers for hunting them?
Nicobaris are not dependent on any of the exotics. Exotics are what we've given them. Exotics are not what were found there, and they are not dependent on any of them for their protein supplement. They're just doing it. They're like what I mentioned also, that they're a very clearly fish and rice eating community. It's just out of fun. Okay, today I have the air gun and I can see a pigeon, so let me hunt it down. So they are not dependent on it. And there is no commercial hunting that happens there at all. Not even fisheries. So they say that the fish die of old age in the Nicobars, incidentally.
That's a good one. Okay, Siddharth has got another question. How does noise pollution affect the ability of bats to use echolocation?
It doesn't hamper them. Now, suppose I'm a moth and the bat is echolocating me. I also know I'm being echolocated. So I move my position. So the bat also knows that the moth has moved. So it does not use the echolocation because the moth is also able to figure out that, I'm being echolocated. It's like a hide and seek game. So what happens is that if there is light, like what I said, bats are not blind. If there's light, bat can see the moth, it will not echolocate. It will just catch it. But if it's a very noisy area, I've seen that the insect-eating bats tend to go into slightly inner, quieter areas. But they don't abandon the roosts or they don't abandon the area at all. So I don't think they really get affected because they're very specific to what they want to hear.
Okay, has the rampant misinformation about bats during the COVID-19 pandemic extended to the Nicobars? Has it affected attitudes among the communities you worked with?
No, not at all. In fact, I gave them a call and they said, don't worry, all the bats are safe. We are also all safe. So I was very happy because, my staff is all from the Nicobars itself. And I keep giving them a call and they give me a call and they say, oh, in fact, I should tell you this story. I radio collared one of the species and I don't know, when I released it, I thought I'll never get it back. And true enough, the next day, I think it was hunted. So when we tracked the radio collar, we tracked it to the hunter's home. So he must have found something on the neck and he put it on the side, saying, I don't know what it is. So when we knocked and said, oh, you ate a bat? He was shocked out of his wits. And he said, how do you know? And after that, we didn't have to tell anybody not to hunt bats because they said, don't touch a bat. They come to know. The bats are telling them. So, it worked in a positive favor that, at least the hunting stopped to quite an extent in the island.
That's very interesting.
So they don't.
Yeah.
They are a very simple community within the Nicobars. It's fun working with the local communities because they understand the importance that I'm coming all the way from a different area, mainland, and working in their islands for something which is important. And they understand a little bit of it, but not so much, but they realize the importance of that particular species. So they're very, very sensitive to these things.
So Vandana, what language were you communicating with the Nicobaris in?
English, Hindi. I learnt a bit of Nicobaris, and sang a lot of Nicobaris Christmas songs also when we were there for Christmas.
Oh, wonderful.
So good fun.
And how long were you there in total?
About a decade.
Wow. Okay. Continuously.
I have a kid named after me. So if they really like you, there are kids that get named after you.
Oh boy.
So I'm thinking that probably I'm accepted well.
Wonderful. That's great. Anita is asking, any record of the coronavirus bat species from India?
Anita, you need to tell me if you had any coronavirus bat from abroad.
I think we'll have to unmute Anita. Anita, can you unmute yourself? Anita is a
Vandana.
marine.
Yes.
Yes, what we had that ICMR results, it shows that there is a bad coronavirus. So that has been recorded from India, but I don't know like how far it is like true or not.
No, it isn't. Because see, bats have this particular virus and they are resistant to a lot of viruses. We are still figuring out of how the resistance is so much. It is it's like kind of a mutant form of the coronavirus that we have. But it is not that it has come from bats at all.
Yeah,
Is what
the
came
SARS,
out.
yeah, the SARS,
SARS.
when it came, it was
True.
being tracked as the fruit fly bat.
Yes.
So then this ICMR result when it came, like so it was a bit confusing because what I could see from your talk, it is they are really, really, friendly, good, and
Good looking.
friendly. So all these cute little, creatures. So I don't know, like how we can, tell these ICMR reports that has been recently coming up. I think if you just Google it, most of them you may get it, but I'm not sure. Like,
I think they did say that it was a COVID R strain, not the coronavirus strain that was found.
exactly,
So
yeah.
because see, it's like they are saying rabies, but I would still say it's very premature for any of us to say that it doesn't come because for a bat to come to humans, it flies extremely high or in the night, and most humans will not go and explore these things. So if it's come to us, it's from our diet.
No,
I
no.
would actually blame the Chinese industry for most of this actually.
Yes, because what I'm telling, what we got the record from SARS, it
Yeah.
is just even with German reports, it shows that it is the sister species. It is corona is not a novel virus at all. It
True.
is just a cousin or sister from SARS. So whatever it is not directly from bats, but it is through the fruits that has
True.
been left out, and people just come into contact with any of these fruits that is coming into the market, kind of thing. But exactly the species is what I'm concerned, like whether it is there in India or it is
No, we
just
haven't got those at all.
Okay.
Now, see, in Guam, what the fruit bats were eating cycads.
Mm.
Now, cycads have certain neurotoxins in them.
Okay.
So when the humans ate the bats, those neurotoxins biomagnified.
Mm.
And they led to a lot of neurodegenerative diseases similar to Parkinson's.
Okay.
So, it could happen, but I would say that all these research things are in a very primitive thing. I'll not say that it is definitely not there, because there is no research happening on these things at all. Like rabies, they say rabies and bats. It's possible, but we've not had those cases in India.
Okay. Thank
So
you.
it could be because there's been no research on it, that we can't figure out that it could or could not happen.
Nothing is documented.
Nothing is documented.
Okay, Anita's got another question. Challenges. What were the challenges you faced while studying or photographing bats?
Challenges were first how to catch it. That's initially, I think I picked up in field only. Then how to identify, and you have to be very, very soft with them, because if you catch them too hard, you will kill them. The bones break. So you have to be extremely soft with them. And well, the fruit bats can give you a very nasty bite. And Nicobas, no rabies. I was bitten and I didn't have a rabies shot at that time. So I didn't get rabies. So I'm presuming within the Nicobas, no rabies through bats. And extremely challenging is making them sit still. Because when you're photographing them and you're telling somebody to hold the bat, you have to tell that person also, be very gentle with it. Don't pull it so hard that you will pull it apart or something. So I mean, I used to be very careful with my bats, that we never had a death in any of our trappings. So my staff was also extremely soft with them, in fact.
That's nice. I think the slide that you've got on the screen right now answers Anita's questions better.
True.
The first question, of course. So that's interesting. Okay, I think we have run out of questions and we possibly have run out of time. So thank you so much, Vandana.
Thank you so much for calling me here.
You're
Anything for bats.
Totally welcome. And I know you've been really busy relocating, but you still took the time out at short notice, and that's very, very appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Do thank Gaurav and Arnav as well. I'm sure they also put in their share of hard work for letting you work on the.
And it's Saturday today, so they are all off.
Oh my God. Okay. Better go back to family time. All right. Thanks, Sid, for the platform that you've given us, and for Karen, who's done a fabulous job with putting the whole thing together. And next time, she's looking forward to presenting it as well. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to the audience for attending, guys. And we hope everybody's learned something and understands bats a bit better than blood-sucking
creepy animals.
Vampires. Yes.
Not scared.
No.
I think we've got a bat enthusiast.
Yes. All right. Good night, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.